Okay, I think we're good to go. This is Random Thoughts from County Antrim, and I'm your host, David McDonnell. And this is my half hour to tell you some yarn, some stories, some historical tidbits, and of course, my random thoughts. And I'm going to try to cram in all of the above, into the next half hour. Today is November 1st, Sunday, the first day of November 2020. Yesterday was my birthday, and I want to thank all of you who sent me well wishes. They're appreciated, even though it's kind of a birthday I would like to forget. I'm of an age where the second digit is 0, and it's one of those milestone age where you don't always want to get. I'm of an age when first thing I do when I wake up is I make a cup of coffee, let the dogs out, and then read the paper. And of course you don't read the paper anymore. I read my iPad and take a look at the news that way. And the first thing I look at is the obituary page. And if my name is not included, then I know it's going to be a good day. But that's what happens when you have too many birthdays. So today I want to tell you a couple of stories. They're both old stories, but I think they both have some resonance today. The first story I want to tell you is called The Fiddler of County Down. And the main character, as you might have guessed, is a fiddle player from County Down. He was known as one of the best fiddle players anywhere. One of the best of all. In fact, there were people who said he's the best there is, the best there ever was, and the best there ever will be. Sort of the Roy Hobbs of fiddle playing. Now, this fiddle player lived in the Mourne Mountains of County Down. He did during the day whatever it is he typically did, but he always made sure he had a couple of hours reserved to play the fiddle, because that's what he loved to do. And he played for himself. He played by himself, for himself, because it was just what he enjoyed more than anything else. And once in a while, a week or so, every week or two, whatever, he would journey into the nearest village. And he would take his fiddle with him, and he would find a stone or a log or a bench in the village square, someplace where he could sit, and then he would begin to play his fiddle. And whenever he did that, the villagers all came out for whatever they were doing in their shops, their stores, their homes, whatever business they were undertaking at the time. They would stop because it was such a treat to listen to this fiddler. They always eagerly gathered around him to listen. Now, at the same time, there was a professor in Belfast, a college professor, and he taught music. He conducted the college orchestra. And this professor had traveled the world and listened to some of the best violin virtuosos there are. And he listened to fiddlers all over the world because he loved the folk tales that fiddlers would typically play. So he equally enjoyed the classics and the folk tunes. Now, this professor had heard very recently about this fiddler in County Down, and he was somewhat surprised to hear this because the fiddler was from County Down, and so you may know your geography. If you don't know your geography, well, first of all, shame on you for not knowing. But Belfast is a city that straddles County Antrim and County Down, big enough to go over the county line. And it surprised him to hear that there was a fiddler of tremendous skills living in County Down, just down the road. So the professor decided to go listen to this fiddler. Now, down, by the way, just I'll throw in a historical or cultural tidbit here. Down, the word down doesn't mean the opposite of up. Down comes from the Irish word dun, which means fort. And you'll see the word dun in many Irish place names. Donegal, Cushendun, many others. Because originally at one point in their history were a fort. For some reason unknown to anybody, when the English arrived, when they spelled town names and county names, they spelled down D-O-W-N, and it became pronounced down rather than done. So that's the why they call it County Down, and I apologize for getting sidetracked. I sometimes easily do. Right in the smack in the middle of my story, I tell you about the origination of the name County Down, but that's the way my random brain works. Anyway, back to the story. The professor was surprised to hear about this fiddler, County Down, because it was so darn close and he just never heard of him before. So he went to the village where this fiddler often performs. And when the professor got there, of course, the fiddler was not there. So the professor checked in at a local inn, hung around town for several days, hoping to see the fiddler. And then one day, a few days later, the professor was sitting on a bench in the village square, and that's when he saw the fiddler walking into the village, carrying his fiddle case. And the fiddler sat down on one of the benches in the village square. Perchance it was just a bench or two over from where the professor was. And the fiddler began to play some tunes. And it wasn't long before everyone in the village surrounded the fiddler, listening to his tunes, along with the professor. And he played some amazing tunes, one after another. Some of them were very upbeat, and the villagers couldn't help but just get up and dance. Some of his tunes were very somber and melancholy, and it wasn't long before tears were flowing down the eyes of down the cheeks of the villagers, because the tunes were just so remorseful and sad, but beautifully performed. Now, when the fiddler was finished, he started to put away his fiddle, and the professor approached him, introduced himself, told him while he was there, and he said, I don't believe, I have to tell you this, I don't believe I have ever heard a better fiddler in all of the world. And he said, will you please do me just one favor, though? He said, if you would be so kind, will you play just one more tune? And if you would make it just your favorite tune of all. Well, the fiddler was quite accommodating, and he said, thank you very much for the compliment. And he said, I indeed will play you one more tune. So the fiddler took his fiddle back out of the case, and he played one more tune. And it was the most wonderful tune that the professor had ever heard. The fiddler just poured his heart out and his soul into this performance. And indeed, during the course of the song, a tear kind of flowed down the professor's eye, down his cheek, because the tune was so beautiful and so wonderfully performed. And the professor then, when the fiddler was finished, the professor said, I've never heard that tune before, and you played it so beautifully. He said, what pray tell, is the name of that tune? And the fiddler replied, the tune is called The Day the Moon Crashed into Ireland. The professor smiled a little bit, and the professor, being a professor, just couldn't help himself but try to correct the fiddler, the small villager. And he said, it is a good tune, and you played it so well, but I just have to tell you, the moon has never crashed into Ireland. Fiddler, kind of reflected a bit, and then he said, well, scientists differ. And that's the story of the fiddler of County Down. And indeed, scientists sometimes differ. And it's kind of the nature of science, I think. That statement is quite profound in some sense. It's kind of obtuse in a few others, depending on the context. Scientists do differ, and that's the nature of science. What is science? Science is the study of what is. The what is doesn't change much over time. Things are what they are. What changes is how we as humans kind of understand the what is. And scientists can rely on data and evidence to try to explain the what is. And as the data and the evidence changes, and is analyzed, it's gathered, it's critiqued, it's reanalyzed, more is gathered, etc., opinions change. Scientists come to conclusions, but they're always tentative conclusions, awaiting more data and more evidence and more analysis and more critique. And during this process, scientists will indeed differ. That's the difference between science and dogma. But sometimes the data and the evidence are so overwhelming, or sometimes there's just a lack of evidence to the contrary. And that's when scientists do not differ, or at least they don't differ in a significant respect. Scientists don't differ in explaining gravity that much. If I climbed on top of a skyscraper and jumped off, I would likely come falling down very rapidly and hit the sidewalk below with significant force. Scientists wouldn't differ on that conclusion. And scientists differ on global warming, the how, why, how rapid is the change, a whole variety of issues relating to climate change in which scientists differ. But scientists do not differ on the fact that we are in the midst of a global climate change and that the results could be catastrophic to humans. I think you could say the same thing about the pandemic. The virus is quite new. We're still gathering data and learning as we go. There have been differences among scientists about how the virus is spread, how to treat those who are infected, what are the long-term effects, how and if people will ever become immune to COVID-19. Scientists differ, and they'll continue to differ as we gather more and more data and evidence. But scientists do not differ on the basic strategies that we can employ to reduce the risk and reduce the probabilities of infection and spreading the infection. And you all know what those are. And finally, scientists do not differ on the fact that the moon has never crashed into Ireland. So that's that story. I do have another story I want to tell you. It's an old folklore, old folk tale, told in many, many contexts, many places in the world. But here's my version of the story. And let me have a sip of my coffee first. The story is called The Magical Stone Soup. And the story takes place in a village in County Cavan in Ireland a few centuries ago. And there was famine in the land, as it happened all too frequently in Irish history. No one had much in the way of food. Everyone was kind of hoping they had enough to just survive until the next harvest. And in this particular village, a stranger walked into the village. He carried a satchel on one shoulder, and he carried a pot, a cooking pot, kind of strapped around his other shoulder. And when people saw him come into town, they quickly ran into their homes and they took whatever food they had and they hid it. You know, they were kind of trusting of each other, but they were worried about a stranger, and they were worried that a stranger might take what little food they had. And then they watched the stranger kind of walked into the village square, and he built a little fire right there in the middle of the road, at the right in front of the center of the village. Built a fire, and he took a couple of poles and kind of leaned them together like a tripod and set that right over the fire. And he carried his pot over to the well and filled it up, not filled, but half filled maybe, of water. And he took the pot over to his tripod, kind of hooked it around the tripod so it was the pot laid right over the fire. And of course the water inside the pot got a little warmer, and after it was beginning to heat up, he looked around, and of course villagers were kind of hanging around trying to figure out what was he up to, and they were coming out of their homes, coming out of the shops, and he announced to all of them, I am going to cook for you my own recipe for magical stone soup. So the stranger went to his satchel, opened it up, pulled out a large rock, a large stone, and he put the stone inside the pot. And then he grabbed a utensil and began to stir the pot inside the hot water. Well, the villagers were watching this, and they were getting more and more curious about this magical stone soup and what it might taste like. And one of the villagers then said, I have an idea. And this villager ran quickly to his home and grabbed a turnip that he had hidden away from the stranger. Returned to the town village square, took his turnip and put it inside the pot. Another villager saw that and said, that's a wonderful idea, and he ran to his home. And he grabbed an onion that he had hidden away in his house. And he took the onion, came over to the village square, and he put the onion inside the pot, which was now getting quite hot, almost to a boiling point. And another man ran and got a piece of mutton left over from a meal he had a few days before. He put that in the pot. And other villagers came in, and they took some greens, a potato, whatever it is they happened to have, and they threw it in the pot. All the while, the stranger was stirring the pot consistently. And when he had stirred it what he thought was a sufficient length of time, the stranger looked at all the villagers and he said, all of you need to go back home. Grab a bowl, grab a spoon, come on back. We will all fill our bellies with this wonderful magical stone soup. And they all did. They went home. They grabbed a spoon, grabbed a bowl. And they all, as he ladled it out into their bowls, everyone had a huge bowl of this wonderful, wonderful soup. And it was delicious. Everyone filled their bellies with this delicious soup. And when the pot was empty, or at least empty of liquid, the stranger took the pot off of the fire, turned it over so that the stone came out, grabbed something that he could protect his hands while he picked up the stone, took the stone and put it in his satchel. And so you see, no one consumed the stone. The stone was not magical after all. It wasn't the stone that caused the soup to be so delicious or to be so filling. It was the cooperation of the villagers, and each contributing that which they could and combining what they had. Now that's the story of the magical stone soup. It's an old folk tale, told in many cultures, many places, and it's often used to just illustrate the concept of cooperation. Now, what made me think of that story? There's many ways to solve a problem. Often it's competition, often it's cooperation, and it seems to be always one or the other. Sometimes cooperation better, sometimes competition. But I'll tell you what made me think of this story. I was reading an article just the other day, and it was about the efforts to develop a vaccine. And by vaccine, you know I'm talking about the vaccine, capital T, capital V, the vaccine, which will protect us all from the virus. There's many brilliant people and brilliant organizations working on this project. But it just seemed to me from the nature of the article that we've set this up as a competition. Whoever creates this vaccine will make billions of dollars. Whoever comes in second or third in this quest to develop the vaccine probably will not get anything. Maybe something, but not much at all. And the article I was reading was just dealing about the hurdles and both the progress and the hurdles being faced in the development of this vaccine, and it involved the timeline involved in trying to develop this vaccine. And this is extremely complicated stuff. I mean, you can call this process warp speed if you like, but it's just very, very laborious and very painstaking process, as you probably want it to be, because you want them to get this right. But buried in the story, it wasn't the focus of the story, but buried within it was a mention of the writer's source of information for some of this part of the virus vaccine process. And one of the sources came from an earnings report that was submitted by a pharmaceutical company to its shareholders and other investors. In public, if you don't know this, public corporations are required by law to submit these kind of reports, and so that investors can assess whether the corporation is likely or is not likely to have profits in the foreseeable future. And there's potential liability for corporations if they're not honest and forthcoming in these kinds of reports. So it was in one of these earnings reports to investors that the pharmaceutical company reported on its good news, which is their leading contender on the vaccine actually did develop some of the antibodies that we think we all need in order to be immune from the virus. But it also recorded the bad news, which was the trials used to test this vaccine did not show a significant effect on preventing the virus. Now, this doesn't mean that the vaccine won't work or its vaccine won't work. It just only means that the company doesn't know yet. It may have something to do with the trial, it may have something to do with the dosage, it may have something to do with countless other variables involved in testing a vaccine. And the company's still working on it, and hopefully they'll come up with the right answer. But my issue is not with the pharmaceutical company. I had to work at on this project, and they made some significant progress, no question about it. My problem is that the only reason we know this is that the company is required by law to keep its investors informed. This is still very much a competition. We don't know if the details regarding the vaccine and its trial and this formula and whatever was shared with any institutions or any universities or other research facilities, or certainly any competitors of the pharmaceutical company. And that seems to be a little strange. I think the development of the vaccine ought to be one of those areas in which cooperation is the way to go. There are many endeavors where competition may yield the best results, but I'm not sure if that's the case with a vaccine in the midst of a deadly pandemic. So I think what we really need here, personally, and I'll put my editorial hat on, I think what we need here is some magical stone soup. So that's my podcast for today, November 1st, 2020. Please take a look at my website, clandonald.net. You'll see my books, By the Horse of Guinness and Clandonald. Send me an email at clandonald@gmail.com. Like my page on Facebook. You'll be able to see on Facebook and my website some of my prior podcasts. And in the meantime, I'll do another one after I have some other random thoughts between now and next Sunday. Thank you very much, and goodbye.